we are at the top of the hour. So Jane, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, absolutely. But just to say welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our first Leaders Advisory Board webinar of 2025. So it's great to have you all on board. For those of you that don't know me, so I'm Jane Smith. I head up the executive search part of the Eden Smith Group. And we specialise in consulting and staffing and education, pretty much across kind of data and technology space. And we've got two fantastic guest speakers for you today. So we've got Jovita Tam, who's a business-focused data and AI advisor. She's got a really kind of unique blend of expertise in law and data and technology and operations. And we've got Daniel Kustrin, who's a fantastic leader in technology. Most recently at De Beers, Daniel headed up the digital transformation function whilst leading on their IoT and their AI strategy globally. So thank you both for agreeing to present for us today. Really looking forward to the discussion. Should be good. But just as a side note, it's we've got, I suppose, in terms of the topic today, we're looking really to cover who owns AI, does one size fit all, balancing business value and risk. So as always, we really love these discussions to be as interactive as possible. So do feel free to ask any questions or relay any thoughts you have, or indeed, I suppose, any examples of how AI is implemented in your business. So either drop your questions into the chat, or even better still, just raise your hand and we'll definitely get you involved. So I think I have probably spoken enough. So I'm going to hand you over to Jovita and Daniel, who are going to take us through the session. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Jane. All right, so let's start off by looking at some statistics. First, in an analysis of 35,000 companies, they found that only 51 of them had a CAIO in 2024, and that went up from 30 the previous year. And from there, this study concluded that the role of CAIO was gaining traction, and they said that it went up 70% year over year. Now, in another poll, polling enterprise leaders asking which C-suite executive is currently accountable for all AI-related risk in their respective organizations, 27% of them said that it was their chief legal and compliance officer, and only 3% said that it was their CAIO. But what was much more interesting was that 21% came back saying they have absolutely no idea. So in a study by Gartner, it found that more than 50% of the organizations have an AI leader. But then 88% of them said that their AI leader doesn't actually have the title of the CAIO. So obviously, like, these surveys were not designed to be looked at side by side, and the results cannot be applied across the board. But what this is telling me is that the market is looking for trends and norm in answering the question of who owns AI, right? But there isn't a uniform answer. So as we dive deeper into the conversation today, I believe that both Daniel and I will be sharing our considerations when answering the questions of who owns AI and why we don't believe that there's a one size fit all.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jovita, for that. Those statistics are very interesting to me. As a person who was asked to be an AI leader and who didn't have AI in the title of any sort, I empathize with those results. But I think statistics are statistics. But what's interesting is we've seen over time how the technology roles are becoming more important in organizations, and how they started fragmenting. We first had the CIO, then we had the CISO, then we had the CDO, then we had another CDO, then we had the chief analytics officers, and now we have an AI role. And all of those things have added to the confusion, because in my experience, having been at boards and having advised boards generally don't understand technology, or they claim that they don't understand the technology. And what they're looking for in the C roles is more of a leadership and executive relationship and less technical strength. But then when we come to something like AI, whoever is leading AI, I believe, needs to be technically very, very strong. So how do we balance this? But then there was a survey done by ThoughtWorks, they looked at all of these different technology C roles, and they asked people, what do you do, right? Where are the boundaries between these roles? And 4 out of 5 people, and it was 270 people interviewed, and 4 out of 5 couldn't explain when the one role finishes, another one started. And only 12% in another survey had no confusion at all. So I think the reason why one role doesn't fit is because, first of all, people don't seem to know what these roles are. And secondly, the boards can't decide how to partition technology. When you talk to some of the businesses, they claim that they're not a technology company. I would argue that every company right now on this earth is a technology company one way or another. And with AI coming in and transformative power it has, it will definitely need some sort of technology lead. But what is that lead? And that's what we're talking about today.
So Dan, I guess from what you're saying is that there are many different ways that we need to look to reorganize this. And in essence, it is about re-examining some of the way we're currently looking at the world, right? I think there's what you mentioned is very rightly that, how do we run this organizational structure? What is the relationship between the board and a lot of the C-level executives? And depending on industry, size of company, and so on, we do see a lot of variations. And I think that plays a lot into it. And there's the idea of what is AI to you as a company, right? Is it just another technology, right? Because later on, today in one of the slides, we have it that for some companies, their approach is to have the CTO, for example, to be the de facto person for their chief for AI, because they're looking at AI as just another technology. But if you're looking at AI as something that is a strategic capability, which I'm more inclined to think that it is, then you really need to think about the relationship of what is a strategic capability versus what am I going to do with this today? What am I looking to do with this? And what message am I sending to the organization, and so on, right? And then the last bit, obviously, is I think that structure, all of these are great, but we also need to look at substantively what is required to fill the role. So let's move on to the next slide.
Let's do that.
So I figured this would be a good starting point to why maybe it depends is a pragmatic answer to who owns AI in an organization. And I do believe that it will evolve with time. First is that, as I mentioned, each company will decide differently, right? Each company has its own value, purpose, strategic priorities, and most importantly, culture, right? How are decisions actually made within an organization is extremely important. And the next thing is, businesses are in different industries, right? And some are much, much more regulated with others. And in kind of my experience of the industry, I am seeing that, regulated industries are moving a little faster in areas like AI governance, because for the last little while, the regulators have been asking these organizations, right? And each organization is at a different part of their business cycle. Some might be more growth focused, while others are naturally just a little bit more risk averse, right? The second thing is, although studies from major management consulting firms are saying that, AI is an opportunity and it's a priority for executives, I think what I've seen in reality is that in some organizations is actually being treated as a hot topic, while in others is actually a hot potato, right? For one reason or another. And I've even seen cases where within the leadership of a department, people disagree. And I think that plays a big role in how we push this forward in an organization, and the posture and what needs to be done first and what skills needs to be prioritized right now. So the third thing is talent gap, right? Along with AI's power come a heightened sense of risk and responsibilities. AI systems can impact things like customer trust, brand reputation, and legal liability. And the laundry list of challenges really could include a lot of things, from anything from biased algorithms to privacy issues, security vulnerabilities, potential regulatory non-compliance, and the list goes on, right? So I think the talent gap here is that as a starting point, the AI leader needs to be a cross-functional expert bridging technology and business strategy. And this is, I think, Dan, what you talked about, there needs to be a substantive component to it. And what you mentioned, that at a board level, people don't necessarily know what the technologists are doing within the company. And is that really sustainable from, the perspective of we're going to introduce AI, which is an omni-use technology in an organization. So the fourth, which Dan, you've already mentioned previously, is expanding the C-suite is not simple, right? Because it really needs to align with the strategic vision of a company. And it is very difficult to undo, right? Because you don't exactly want to kind of open up a new seat and then, maybe in a couple of years or couple of months or whatever, need to kind of remove that role, backtrack, or redraw the lines. And I think lastly, like, although all of us in this room are likely, to be very heavily involved with technology, in today's business environment, I do believe that there are quite a number of things that are not technology related, which are on executives' minds, right? So how much resources are we devoting to it? How does that play with, all the other urgent priorities becomes a real challenge, I guess. So Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
Obviously, I agree with everything that you've said. There are a couple of interesting things to I think pick out. So the expansion of the C-suite is an interesting one because there are two trends. There is a trend of fragmentation, as I mentioned before, but there is now this new kind of push towards creation of a super tech leader, because I think the boards have realized they have more tech people on the board than non-tech people. They don't know what they're doing. But I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here, and I'm just going to float a question out there that I think we can address as we go on today. Is AI, and when we're talking about AI today, let's be honest, we're talking about generative AI, because we've been doing AI for I've been doing AI for 30 years, right? But one of the jokes is AI stops being AI once it starts being used, right? So nobody thinks of a route planner as an AI thing, but it was originally developed as an AI algorithm, the A-star algorithm. It's now used, your phone has it, your Google Maps has it, whatever your TomTom has it, that is AI. Image processing, machine learning, facial recognition, that's all AI. We've been doing this for ages, right? I mean, we're currently using, your background that you have is using a image processing that came from AI to remove everything and just put you on. So we're talking about generative AI. So the question I have, and I'm going to float it up there, is generative AI blockchain, right? Do we need a C blockchain officer? No, right? So do we need a Gen AI officer? So we'll pick that up, I think. And then the talent gap is an interesting one. We have a talent gap at the top level, or do we? Because earlier I said that AI leaders need to be very technical. Yes, I believe that because I come from technical side of AI. However, I really think the CAIO as a role is a transformation role. And Jovita, we've had this conversation offline as well, and I know we agree. AI and Gen AI, as is happening now, is an organizational transformation process. Yes, there is a technology component to it, which is super important, but I think the key here, and maybe something we'll talk more about, is the transformation of the organization. It's an organizational management issue here. So maybe we can pick that up on the next slide.
Yeah, maybe we can pick that up on the next slide. And I think you bring up like a lot of really good points there, right? And, as Jane mentioned, I do have a legal background myself. And, we are kind of jumping, feet first into a lot of these things. But, while traditionally we go out into the marketplace and we look for kind of consensus as starting points, right? We look to the left, we look to the right, and it's like, what is everybody else doing? And we're looking for best practices, maybe best practices within the industry, so on and so forth, right? But Daniel, to your point, right? If we look across the industry, or maybe even from a legal perspective, right? We look at like the various legislation, guidance, and stuff like that. If you look at the definition part of it, it really is everywhere, right? And that's why, for me, when I work with my clients on AI governance and other, AI strategy, my first thing that I would say is, well, what does AI mean to you and your organization right now, right? And I think that is one of the things that will go to the heart of answering the question of who owns AI in your organization. Well, what does AI mean to you in your organization, right? And, as you say, like for some organizations, it will be Gen AI because they have been using other forms of AI for a very, very long time. But maybe in other organizations, that's not the case, right? And they're completely dabbling at it from like a very nascent stage, then they're going to have a different relationship with it. So, I think that makes a huge difference. So let's move on to the next slide, and then we'll kind of pick up the change management kind of a conversation. So here, what we have collected for you is 5 of the most common approaches that we see out there. The first one is a dedicated CAIO role, and usually this individual will be asked to drive AI initiative, including AI governance, and will be responsible for the ROI for this AI. And an example of organizations that have a dedicated CAIO role would be Eli Lilly, Pfizer, and Boeing. So again, I just kind of picked these things out as I was like researching on the topic, right? Not to say that smaller companies don't have dedicated CAIO roles, but the things that definitely popped up first are things that are in very regulated industry. And, as you can see, is aviation there, and is, the healthcare industry. So the second thing that we see is the CDO, expanding the CDO role to include AI responsibilities. An example of this is JP Morgan Chase. But interestingly, and we'll put a pin on it, is that there are also studies out there that are saying that although this is a popular approach, the adoption and the success of this varies, because as we all know, right, although you may have different individuals holding, CDO titles, their normal day-to-day responsibilities within their organization can vary quite substantially, right? And you could have people coming from very different experiences holding this role. So in some cases, organizations are seeing success in these areas, and others, people are saying, yeah, it is now within my remit, but it is a very, very low priority for me. Yeah. So I'm seeing that, kind of diverge into two opposite ends. The next one is CTO and CIO. We talked about that. The view in this case is that the CTO or the CIO would de facto be the owner of this initiative because AI in this case is being treated as another technology. Of course, then AI strategy in this kind of way of thinking would fall with the CTO and the CIO. The last two are a little bit more interesting. One of them is a distributed approach. So usually the starting point of it would be having an AI or an ethics committee. And where I've seen this is maybe a lot of very regulated industries, such as banks, right? They may already have a very, very established data governance or other types of governance program. And they decided that, for them, it's about finding what is like net new, right? And then they'll build their governance program on top of that, and then their technology team will continue to focus on the AI implementation part of it, and then they'll come together. And then there's the hybrid approach, which is where there's a central AI leadership, whether it is a CAIO, whether it's an AI leader, whatever that may be. But on top of that, there would be a cross-functional oversight committee that sits on top of it. And I'm going to throw two more, which are like more out in the left field. There is that sometimes, like I've seen the CEO will just be like, no, no, no. This is so important for the future of our company that as a message to the organization, I'm now also, right? The CEO will say, I'm also now the chief executive that's responsible for this. And then the other scenario is that the COO in that organization who's working in partnership with the CEO, because that individual is already working on kind of initiatives across the organization, and the current mandate perhaps is to leverage AI to increase productivity, it actually falls on the plate of the COO. So Danielle, to you.
No, this is perfect because it shows the breadth of approaches people have tried, and we are currently in a bit of a wild west when it comes to implementation of AI, and this makes sense because every organization is different, and depending, as you said before, depending on where AI sits in the overall importance to an organization, I guess they will try a different approach. But if we look at these things, if we look at each of these roles or approaches one by one, we can see that they have pros and cons, obviously. So yeah. CDO sounds to me like a perfect place for an AI to sit in, because AI cannot exist without data, right? The problem is, as many people on the call will know, data is a problem. Everybody will always tell you that the data is great in public, and in private, they will tell you the data is absolutely terrible, that they're not sure about the veracity, the cleanliness, the timeliness, that data is an issue. So the poor CDO spends all their time trying to make sure the data is right. That's why AI is not as important. Or if they had any AI training, they don't want to jump into AI because they want data to be right. If you train your AI on poor data, the outcomes will be appalling. And they know that. Now, if you go to a CTO or a CIO, and they're very different, they may not realize this, right? So they will go, you know what, we'll do AI, it's fine. Now, CIO as a role is an interesting one to run AI, because CIOs are really traditionally focused on keeping the lights on, right? The focus of a CIO is they're usually stuck in a spiral, negative spiral, of cost cutting and defense, right? How do I keep my legacy systems going? How do I satisfy the latest cost cutting requirements I'm getting? So to them, implementing AI may not be high on an agenda unless they're being told it's something that's high on the agenda. CTOs usually are more innovation focused, and we should have added CIO, right? Chief Innovation Officers, because sometimes they also now run AI, because AI is innovation. So CTOs focus on innovation and technical strategy. So to them, AI may feel like a more interesting thing, but again, their focus usually is on product. If they're in an organization that is implementing products, it's all about getting the products over the line, because that's what companies are about. If they're in a larger non-tech organization as a CTO, it's about tech strategy, and maybe AI fits better there. But none of these, not the CDO, CTO, CIO, or Chief Innovation Officer, none of them really have AI as the number one priority, regardless of whether board tells them it's the number one priority, because they already will have a full to-do list. If you're a CIO and you have to worry about desktops and printers and security and legacy systems and all the regulations, AI is just one more thing, and it's just going to be added to the list. This is why I think CAIO is coming into play, because it will be somebody who's actually given space to expand on this. But are they really? And how will then they play with the CDO and the CTO and the CIO? And I think this is why a lot of organizations have ended up on these distributed hybrid roles. And I know both you, Jovita, you and I agree that depending on the organization, something like this may be the right way out. The problem is, when you end up with a distributed hybrid, you are almost encouraging the very thing that is making CIO's life misery, which is the shadow IT, right? We're now having the shadow AI. People are building AI models on the side. They're doing it in secrecy almost because they don't want to be blocked by all these rules and regulations that are being put in place. And that is a huge risk to organizations. And we could have a whole different conversation about shadow AI and low code, no code. I'm very happy to talk to anybody about that. I have strong views, but it's a problem. So I think, and again, we can maybe pick this up through questions I'm sure people will have. How do we deal with shadow AI? Because shadow AI is also becoming shadow IT. You can now ask AI agents to create code for you. How scary is that? So there are many approaches, as we can see here. There are more approaches, like you said, COOs, CEOs, chief innovation officers, strategy people as well sometimes get involved in AI. So everybody's having a go at AI. What is the right answer? Let's discuss some more.
And Dan, I think, what is, it's not just what is the right answer. I think we need to be a little bit more precise and go, what is the right answer for you now, right?
Correct.
And it's the missing words there that really does make a difference. I think there are a lot of these different approaches, but essentially, and we talked about this previous, is that AI is not immune to a lot of the organizational challenges, right? And AI governance is not. And because AI is an omni-use technology, we must be a lot more vigilant when we're looking at this, and we must not be delusional to be like, because this is important, because this has a lot of potential, and therefore people will necessarily come together in an organization that don't traditionally come together, right? And in your example about CDOs, like I've talked to a lot of CDOs where essentially it is a budget concern, right? And that becomes another thing. So when in some organizations your board will come in and tell you, hey, I need to be able to tell investors, I need to be able to tell whoever that we are leveraging AI, we need to show a presence, right? But then the question is, well, how does everything else follow, and how does it work with existing responsibilities? And I think a lot of it, as what we've talked about, it is change management, and leadership is about making choices, and it is about balancing, right? Not just balancing between the value that you would get out of it and the risk, but balancing kind of keeping the lights on versus your innovation, balancing between delivering on short-term what your board may or may not be asking you to do, and longer-term health of a company. And depending on what your position is on these, you're likely going to end up with a different answer. Krista, can we please move on to the next slide? And I think this is like a great segue, right? Is to get into this slide is the idea of it has to be substance over form. And I'm going to start off by saying that I've been working in, digital transformation basically my entire career, right? And there are certain things that just downright doesn't work. And I think the starting point of, what to do with AI or AI governance is to see if we can learn the lessons from other areas, from change management, from other, risk and compliance programs, learn from data governance, and don't do those things, right? An example of that would be that I recently talked to a friend who was heading up a data governance team, but he told me that he was let go this year because this year data governance is not a priority for the firm. And I was like, oh wow, 2025, people are still running data governance as a project as opposed to a program, right? And if you apply the same thing to AI and go, okay, well, currently, for whatever reason, this is no longer a priority, knowing that, AI is already embedded in your organization, not because maybe you homegrown AI, it's just naturally the vendors that you've signed up have incorporated AI into the products and is now part of your business process, and you then go fire your entire AI governance team or whatever because this year is not a priority. Things like that is not going to work, right? So what I have on the screen, I think, Dan, we've communicated on this, are, the three things that we feel like are absolutely essential, right? Whether you want to decide to call, have a dedicated CAIO, whether you want your CDO to take on the responsibility, a hybrid approach, I think it's important to have, clear accountability, right? The study where they went and asked a bunch of executives and 21% said, I have no idea who in the C-suite is responsible for the AI risk. That's just unacceptable, right? There needs to be somebody and there needs to be clear accountability. And the second thing is balance between business and risk. We're all very interested in AI because it's an omni-use technology and has great promise. But with this great promise comes great risk. Dan, as you've mentioned, well, you can now leverage AI to write code. What are we going to do with all of these things which are homegrown, right? From a legal perspective, we have the EU AI Act, which focuses maybe on the AI component of things, but being compliant with the EU AI Act, in my opinion, is just a very small part of AI governance, because in a sense, you still need to comply with all the rest of the laws out there, right? You can't have people, within your organization breaking employment law, on a separate occasion, and then, your governance is, or whichever ethics committee is just focused on like maybe AI as a technology. So finding that balance between business with risk is extremely important because, of course, over time, we need to justify our investments as well. And the last thing is cross-functional coordination, because AI doesn't operate in a vacuum, and the owner of AI must work in a network kind of a way. So Dan?
Absolutely. But one of the things that I think is maybe worth kind of circling all the way back, and I've seen a few comments pop up about this, is AI is currently a buzzword. This is why I used blockchain early on, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of companies are jumping on the bandwagon. They all want to be seen to be doing AI. And, if I was being really mean, I would say the purpose of having a CAIO is to not show the internal organization you're serious about AI, but to be able to show everybody else that you're taking AI seriously, right? So that's one thing. So are companies doing AI because it's really going to advance them forward? And if you've seen the latest Microsoft thing, they're trying to downplay the impact of AI on business value, which I think was very interesting. But the other thing is delivery, right? Because we're talking here about accountability, and people may think that we are talking more about the strategy and we're talking about who owns the ethical and legal framework, but this is also about delivery, right? Because we can plan and we can strategize and we can create frameworks and we can create rules and regulations, but it's about business value and it's about delivery. So who then delivers this? Does the CAIO also own delivery, or does that fall into a product? And how do we then balance this? And this is where the cross-functional coordination at the bottom is. So it is about strategy, it is about legal, it is about delivery, it is about ethics, but it's also about internal people. And again, I think AI, everything we talk about can be brought down to people, because people are worried that AI is going to replace their jobs or change their jobs. I don't think replace is the right word. It's change more, and I hope it will change for the better. I'm an optimist. But it's about people and about how people then implement things and how do we deliver. And I think delivery of AI is going to be very interesting. And again, I'm going to go back to the shadow IT, because I saw one of the comments is, we can create custom GPTs, the people can share the knowledge, and it's all very democratized, which is really, really good. But are they allowed to? Are they sharing it in the right way? Is it based on the right data? Is everybody allowed to see the data it's based on? There are so many of these rules and regulations in place, or there should be, or people haven't even thought about it yet. So how do we get all of this working together without stopping everybody from innovating? CTO hat on, I really want to build AI models. Business leader hat on, everybody stop, risk is too high, right? Board member, let's just build stuff and sell it, right? How do we balance this?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the challenge is. And that's why, when I said at the beginning, right, this is not necessarily about, do we create an extra seat at the seat level? It is really about organizations as a whole and as a collective of humans, right, in an organization to achieve whatever purpose it might be, right? Some organizations, their purpose is literally to sell a widget. Others, is to do good in the world in a specific area. Whatever that mission is, when you have a collection of people together, that's when, you need to look at it from that perspective. And I think that's why there isn't a one size fit all, right? I think for organizations that have challenges with cross-functional coordination in general, right? And I've worked on a lot of transformation projects where that is the case, right? Again, with AI, that is not going to be immune to it, right? And that is something that people do need to figure out, because getting AI to work in that organization is going to be hard, because you do need people from different skill sets to come together. So in that case, like, would having a CAIO, right, with no resources, like, going to be able to help deliver on any of this? Like, no, right? It really doesn't matter what title you give the person. In that kind of culture, in that organizational environment, it does become, very, very difficult, right? So I think that at the end of the day, there's a very practical element that exists here with this.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed. And I think it will be interesting as we go into more of a question period later, if anybody was willing to put a hand up and offer their views, and we can broaden this out to a wider audience, I think. But I think personally, there is a huge cultural component in implementing change in general, right? Yeah. And in implementing AI specifically. Some time ago, I used to consult for a European company, and it was in finance. And I had a great teaching moment for me. We were talking about doing I was doing a lot of quant work at the time, and we were looking at how we could structure some products. And a person who's not from the UK or US said to me, we should do X. And I said, well, we can't do X. It's illegal. We have rules and regulations against it. And he said to me, yeah, but rules and regulations as laws are a suggestion, right? So just because obviously the answer to that was absolutely not, we're not doing that. However, just because we have policies, just because we have committees, just because we have ethics in place, and just because companies are pushing all of this, it doesn't mean that people on the ground are necessarily following it. And this is where I think that the transformation and the cultural component comes in. However we implement the AI, however we bring the AI into organization, it has to fit the culture of that organization. The way you bring AI into a 15 people startup is going to be very different to the way you bring it to a 5, 10, 50,000 mining company.
Yeah.
Well, it's people process technology. Sorry, Jane, it's people process technology, right? So with change, the hardest bit is always, I think, with the people. Like you would have your technology challenges, your process challenges, but ultimately, I think it is about convincing the people, right? And AI is definitely, I wouldn't call it a transformation. Like, I think that there are a lot of roles out there right now which are looking for AI transformation leaders. And I I would disagree with that. I think AI is going to be an evolution, and it's going to be a journey. It's not necessarily, we mark an X, in the future, we know what it's going to be like, and we're all heading towards kind of that X, right? And I've seen enough of transformation in my career to be like, well, usually what happens is everything moves to the right? And then by the time you hit that date of, the success or whatever it is, then people celebrate to say, oh, wow, wonderful. This is an absolute success. But in reality, what happened was that you've barely configured your new tech, right? And then the next step is because maybe the CIO or the CTO have promised a cost-cutting objective to, other senior executives, and then you start losing institutional knowledge, right? So that type of change is going to have, it has detrimental effects in other types of transformations and other types of, technology platform shift. But when it comes to AI, right, is going to be even more detrimental. So sorry, Jen.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was just completely backing up what you were saying. And I think in terms of, I suppose different businesses and where they are on their AI and data journey, it's going to implement an AI into a business is going to, be so different across the board, really. So it's just really interesting just hearing, the discussion in terms of kind of different job titles and whether, a company should, invest in a chief AI officer. And again, it goes back to whether a company is, I suppose, financially ready to be able to add another person to that C-suite level. So yeah, it's really good discussion.
It's a fair point, but I think we've missed one approach mechanism. I just came to me as we were talking, and I know I have a blind spot for it because I'm hoping it doesn't happen, but it happens all the time, which is a lot of organizations are outsourcing their implementation of AI because they feel that they don't have the expertise in-house. So they are going to consultancies, and they're literally saying to consultancies, do AI for us, right?
Yeah.
And the consultants are going, yes, please, please give us lots of money. We'll do AI for you, whatever that is. And I think that personally, that's a really, really bad idea, because AI, I think, is going to be, you said evolutionary, Jovita, I think is transformational, because the power of AI, I hope, will replace a lot of drudgery, a lot of boring work, a lot of things that people do. I mean, if I could have an AI to go to all my boring meetings and they can let me do the things that I'm really enjoying, good at, that would be amazing. I mean, we should have meetings where just AI agents meet and everybody else does interesting work, right? But if we are getting to a world where a lot of work that we do that's boring or that we find boring can be done by some sort of an agent, we can't let other people decide for our business how the transformation should happen. I really strongly believe that. So I don't have an answer for everyone how you should structure within your business AI transformation, but please don't ask other people to do it for you. That's one of the things that I would say. How do you feel about that, Jovita?
So Dan, first of all, I didn't say that I think AI was going to be evolutionary as opposed to transformational. I think that in the change journey, right, it is evolution, because like what I've seen is that people with kind of change management, people get very aggressive with, what they think they can change overnight, right? And that traditionally is a problem, right? You really need to do things, one step at a time. You can take very quick successive steps, right? But skipping over foundational things like, generally doesn't work. And to your point about consultancy, I think that, and part of this is the talent gap, right? It's like, what are the expertise do I have in-house, right, versus outside? Do I need this full time, or can I get a person to come in and advise us? So I think there's a difference between getting somebody who's experienced and with an outside kind of a view looking in to help advise and to analyze and to point things out, to build roadmaps and to lend that expertise. But is different than to say, hey, you do it all for me, and then I'll grab it from you when we're done, right? And I
Correct.
think we're also seeing a different kind of outsourcing model, which will be particularly detrimental to AI. It's not so traditionally you may have, I'll hire a reputable consulting firm, and it would have a team of, maybe relatively junior consultants to help me build a solution, and it comes in, right? But what we're seeing more of is that we are going to hire a consultancy firm to come in for a relatively kind of shorter amount of time, limit the scope of the engagement, but on an everyday situation, right, we would switch it over to BAU quite quickly, right? But what happens is that we might tap talent pools which are offshore, right? And I think with AI and with what we're doing with a lot of this, there's still an element to this where it is still quite experimental, right?
Yeah.
So unless this kind of stables out a little bit more, or depending on your organization, right, what your journey is, I think taking those steps, right, too early could equally be detrimental. And this is not AI is a change journey. It really is iterative, right? I think, I started some of these conversations late last year, and by now my advice to my clients are completely different, because way back when it used to be, hey, it is actually worthwhile for you to accumulate some knowledge yourself and to test out some of these things. But, fast forward a couple of months, I might be telling the guy, hey, there is a quite, well-defined product out there, don't build this from scratch, but you do need to know how this product works from a risk management, AI governance perspective, right? So things are still changing quite rapidly.
Yeah, lots and lots of food for thought there, definitely. Just conscious of time, I was just wondering if anyone had any questions at all for you both. I had. What's Chris said? Oh, we've got a hand up. Robbie.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, just still finishing up a very large news media company where everyone seems to be keen to jump on AI as the golden bullet without understanding what the risk and balance is versus opportunity. Have you had examples of where AI has gone badly wrong from a kind of reputational damage or a kind of a customer experience perspective, and how you propose to tackle that from a kind of governance and planning perspective?
Dan, do you want to take that first, or you want me to?
I can happily jump into that.
Okay.
So I don't have any concrete examples of when things went wrong, because I don't think anybody's owning up to it. This is just like the security breaches, especially early on. Nobody ever had any security breaches, right? Nobody has ever failed implementing AI. But from my experience consulting on AI and talking to friends who work in AI, very few AI projects have actually delivered what was promised. And the reason for that is we are still in the hype part of the Gen AI. There is a lot of hype around it. People are still I think the expectations people have of AI and the whole, they're giving powers to this basically very good autocomplete thing that are not there, and then they're surprised that it's not delivering what it's supposed to be doing, right? But have I seen any damages to reputation? Not yet. How would we deal with it is an interesting question, because obviously all the large companies that I'm aware of have ethical committees, have put guardrails around, have started thinking about how do we protect our reputation and our risk from AI, because the risk is potentially almost infinite, right? If you connect your Gen AI, say you're a company that has very large IoT estate, and it has lots of real-time data, and it has robotics, and you suddenly join some Gen AI to it and allow it to interact with these devices. Who knows what could happen, right? It will be amazing. We've seen films about it. Terminator is a good one, but let's not go. Obviously, I'm being flippant here. But that is not an impossible solution where possible outcome where something goes wrong because of misunderstanding of what systems do. As a person who's done neural networks for my PhD, even I struggle in understanding how some of these models work and what is it exactly that they've learned. There is progress being made in that, but it's still very much a black box. And I'm sure that people on the call will disagree with me, and I'm happy to have the conversation with them. But we don't quite know how AI works, really. So it's very difficult to understand what the potential risks are, which is why we then fall back onto the traditional legal rules and regulations. And I think at the moment, that is the best thing to do. However, clear accountability, we still have the slide there, is so important. There has to be somebody who will own that risk. There has to be somebody who will then think about risk, because if you don't own the risk, it's not really a risk to you, right? You will focus on something else. So if my priority is to deliver, and I'm told delivery is everything that you should care about, risk may be less so. So there has to be somebody with clear accountability. Jovita, you're a lawyer. How do you feel about this?
So Robbie, to your point, there are websites out there that do track AI incidents, and there are quite a number of them. So, feel free to look them up. I haven't, been really keeping up with it in terms of, reputational damage and the like in recent times, right? Because there hasn't been anything that I think, blew up in a super bad kind of a way, right? Earlier days, of course, there were chatbots that were kind of cursing at customers. There were, chatbots that were giving away company secrets and the like, right? And those are quite, reflect quite poorly on the company in terms of reputational risk. And I think that we do see that with a lot of companies caring about reputational risk and caring about the risk around that, right? We are seeing people care about it a little bit more recently. So I would say, maybe a number of years ago, people would mostly focus on operational risk, but nowadays people are aware when they kind of get into the table and talk about it, that it is something real. And in the past, I have held roles which are kind of customer centric kind of a roles or customer experience type roles, right? And I think it is up to individuals within the organization. So ideally, your organization would be customer centric in a sense where everybody is advocating and everybody is sitting here looking at how this looks and feels like from the customer's point of view, right? The reality is that that's not always the case, and most of the time the customer is sort of the missing voice, right, when you're having internal meetings. But if you guys do have a department or people responsible, right, for the customer experience within the organization, and if they're relatively sophisticated, they'll likely have done things like a customer journey mapping, whatever other things that they would do, looking at their interaction with the company, right? Kind of following that trend would be a good way to help identify some of the potential risk where it could lead to negative reputational damage. But I do think that from what I've experienced, at least in the regulated industry, people and companies are still relatively cautious when it comes to implementing Gen AI, which are public facing, right? Because those are traditionally organizations that understand the risk. However, as I posted on LinkedIn, a while ago, I bought a piece of furniture. I was actually talking to a bot of a customer experience, rep kind of a thing. It was absolutely lovely. They just didn't tell me that I was talking to a bot until they asked for my feedback afterwards. So again, we're seeing, differences in treatment because I had a positive experience with the bot, or I could have had a very negative experience with the bot, right? In that case, it would lead to what you're talking about. And again, it goes back to the business value versus risk. You draw it in a different place, right?
I've actually seen the opposite. I've seen a bot put up on a site, but actually behind the bot, they don't trust the AI to do it because of the reputational damage. And there's a team of full-time employees sat there answering the bots, which is a very interesting way of
Yeah.
looking at it.
And
I've canvassed a lot of media companies in my sector, and whilst ChatGPT is a great thing for doing things like subject lines and optimizing text, they're actually all use their own versions of it where everything they put in never leaves the firewall, but they're able to absorb coming into it all the knowledge out in the world, so it avoids the reputational damage leak. So that's been some good lessons learned from the industry.
For sure. And that's a very blunt way of doing it, right? And I think as we're progressing, we're going to see some of those hard firewalls erode. And I think, Jovita, what you said about the user journeys and mapping those out, absolutely. But I think we need to take this a little bit further. Just like in security, we hire white hats to hack our systems. I think we need to hire white hat prompt engineers to not just look at the standard story, the standard flow that the users will have, but to actually try to break systems. And I think the good mention there, good call out for chatbots sharing secrets. There was I haven't fact checked it, but I love the story. Somebody asked Microsoft AI to tell them a story like the grandma used to, in which grandma used to share valid Office 365 product keys, and Copilot did. So I think it's brilliant. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I wish it was, because it would be a perfect example of how not to do things. But if you did a standard user flow, that will never come up, right? And that's why you need to have white hat prompt engineers to really have a go at your AI. But I would advise you to do that even for your internal apps, because yes, employees are your employees, and we're all, parts of organizations, but not all of them are good actors, right? And even within organizations, there should be barriers with how information is shared. So I think this is a whole new world that we are experiencing. And we need to think not just from product perspective, not just from user perspective, but we need to bring our security people in, because they've spent years thinking, how do we hack systems? Guess what? These are new systems that need to be hacked or can be hacked.
That's a really good point, Sarah. And I know Sid, because I know we're up against time, but Sid, you had your hand up. Did you still have something you wanted to say?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, I did have my hand up, but being conscious of time, I just put it down because
we've got a few minutes. We've got a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Firstly, Jane, yourself and Krista for organizing this. And thank you so much, Jovita and Daniel, for your fantastic contribution and the slides that you've put in. Firstly, on the main topic of this discussion, who should own AI? I just have a view, given my experience and what I do and what I've been doing for the last many years. I think AI, this very term AI, is very generically used today. And I think one very important distinction that Daniel made, and he clarified, in fact, I was asking myself that question, that what sort of AI are we discussing over here? And he clarified that this is actually generative AI that we are discussing. I think that's very fundamental, because we have been doing AI for many years now, creating all these models, deriving intelligence, and I've built, so many AI systems. So I was wondering what sort of AI, and Daniel, very right. Thank you, Daniel, for clarifying that. So we are discussing generative AI. Now, AI has got different aspects. Like you have a business aspect of AI, you have a technology aspect of AI, you have a security aspect of AI. So you have got all these different aspects of AI. So in my humble opinion, I don't think one person should be heading AI as such. So we should have a committee, like we are in my organization, we are building a committee, which will be represented by the heads of these respective aspects of AI. And basically there has to be this collaboration for a unified decision. That is my first thing, to come to for the main agenda of this conversation. The second thing what Daniel mentioned is outsourcing AI, and to which Jovita I agreed to what she said. I think again, depending on the aspect of AI which you're outsourcing, it matters. You can have a AI advisor person coming in and advising the institution about how to implement AI. But you see, AI is as good as the data that is fed into the AI, basically the data on which it is trained. And that is dependent on the enterprise, basically, you see. So depending on which aspect, if it's a business aspect, maybe it would be better dealt with by someone internal. If it's an implementation aspect, technology aspect, maybe someone from outside can come in and help. So depending on which aspect of AI you are dealing with, it depends whether you should be outsourcing this or that particular piece of work, or you should be doing it in-house. And
it's definitely a good point, Sid. And again, I think it definitely goes back to, I suppose, where a company is in terms of their AI journey. But I know we're definitely up against time now, and we could talk. Yeah. I think we could have another 2 or 3 hours in the diary talking about this subject. But
easy.
Yeah. It's always the way.
Sorry, this is me, my lawyer side kind of coming in. Sid, I just want to point out one thing. I agree with Daniel that for the most part, for a lot of these conversations, we are talking about Gen AI, because as Daniel said rightly, we've been doing AI for a good number of years. However, one thing to point out is if you look at a lot of the legislation out there, including the EU AI Act, they will not make the distinction of Gen AI, and essentially they adopt a very, very broad definition of AI. So one thing of answering the question of who should own AI, the challenge is to keep in mind that from a risk and a regulatory perspective, right, they don't split it out, right? So it's like we want to make sure that we're not carving it out, and that there isn't a gap between Gen AI and kind of non-Gen AI, if you would, because the current state of a lot of the governance and the regulation is that they're not making the distinction, and there's still a lot of uncertainty.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me just add a little to that. The reason why I specify Gen AI is because that's what most people think when they say AI these days, right? Because like I said, anything that you use day to day is no longer seen as AI.
Yeah.
But personally, I welcome the fact that that AI is such a broad thing, and that now we're putting legislation in for governance. Because in the past, I mean, the whole facial recognition thing kind of got swept under the rug because nobody wanted to talk about it. It's AI. Now it will fall under regulation. Hopefully we'll get something out of it. But Sid, just to go back to your having a committee, I agree. That's a really good approach because you get experts from each area contributing. But I still believe you need to have somebody who is ultimately responsible. And the reason for that is, in my experience, at least through my career, shared responsibility means nobody is responsible, right? So having somebody whose rear is on the line for the risk, because of the level of the risk, it's a good thing. Now, originally I said whoever runs AI should be super technical. In this case, the answer is no, they don't need to be. They need to be able to tell BS from non-BS, right? So they need to know have some technical component to it, but they need to be a coordinator. They need to be somebody who can speak to the board, who can build executive relationships, who understands the risk, who can talk to the lawyers and bring it all together. And I think, that's what we need. There aren't many people out there who are like that, but they do exist. And we need those people to run AI, especially in large organizations. Now, you wouldn't want that in a 15-person startup. And this is why horses for courses, as the phrase goes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good kind of way to finish, is just getting someone who, so the question is, who owns AI? Who should own AI? So really, I suppose the person, regardless of what the company is and what the job title is, it's really getting someone who can cross between that technology and I suppose, the rest of the business to be able to, you know, manage the AI function, to be able to build up, scale out, you know, the AI team, to really, I suppose, you know, look at the talent that's out there to bring on board, you know, and to really, I suppose, just drive that agenda. So no, it's a really interesting discussion. So thank you so much, Jovita and Daniel, you know, and everyone who's attended today as well. So I think, as I say, I think we could go on and talk for another 2 or 3 hours or so, but I'm sure you've got lots of other exciting things to do this afternoon. So thank you so much for attending, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Brilliant.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.